All right, so we're going to talk about hybrid data management. Skip on to the next slide and the next slide. Now, with me, sadly, Angela woke up this morning and not feeling entirely on target. So she's taken the day off. So with me, we're going to have William Durkin and Bob Walker. And Mr. Walker, I don't think we've ever met, but I've been loving your tool for, God, 6-7 years now.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, well, no, thank you. It's great stuff. And then William Durkin, Data Masterminds, organizer of, among other things. Yeah, my wife is over here cheering because she likes William too. Amongst other things, he does data grilling. What else, William? You got a couple other things up, and a couple other balls up there.
Recently, we did New Stars of Data. That was a week ago.
Yep. I did not take part in that one, I'm sorry to say, but
you couldn't be a speaker because obviously we were only taking new speakers.
Yeah, I know, and I should have mentored. I was kind of overwhelmed. Work has been
There's
weird.
Lots of things going on at the moment. Yeah, it's not a worry at all.
Cool. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, guys. Thank you for coming in, and let's go ahead and get going. Let's start talking. Oops, up next. Okay, well, I guess we're supposed to just leave the screen up like this. There we go. I have questions. So let me bring them up so I get them right. By the way, for anyone who's watching, feel free to put your questions into the Q&A box. That's the best place for them, but I will also keep an eye on the group chat, so don't hesitate to ask. I'm going to start right off and just ask you guys, why would an organization go with a hybrid model? I mean, why not just keep everything local or go 100% to the cloud? What is this hybrid junk for?
Do you want to give it a go, Bob? Or shall I?
Oh, no, I was going to say, you go ahead. I'm very curious to see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so where I sit in the data space, we advise companies on exactly these sorts of things. Strategy on how to take care of data and where things are going and whether or not you should go all in on the cloud or ignore it all or whatever. And I'm going to give the typical answer of it depends, right? Where is your data best stored? You need to make sure that certain legal aspects are covered. You need to make sure that certain financial aspects are covered. And also just generally technology, which is the right technology for you. So I spent the last few months with a lot of different projects on exactly this question. Where exactly should a company start spending its money? And I'm based in Germany, and the German market in terms of tech always seems to be 2 or 3 steps behind, should we say, the rest of the world. It's always very cautious in terms of data and in particular sovereignty of data, making sure nobody has access to the wrong data. And immediately the first argument with cloud is, oh my God, that's someone else's systems. Cloud equals internet equals everybody has access. And that's not true. It's just not true, right? It's just another person's computer. I mean, these are companies that I talk to who also outsource their hosting to a company. And effectively, the cloud is just outsourcing with a different name. And yeah, hybrid is gonna be, as far as I'm concerned, it's going to be at least till the end of my career. It's going to stay around. It's always going to be a mixture. This whole digital 1-on-0 on-prem or cloud doesn't really happen. And if people are doing so, then it's almost a religious zealousy where they're saying, nope, I want to stay in this area or I want to stay in this area. I completely trust the cloud or I completely hate the cloud. Luckily, that sort of mentality is more in the older generation of IT managers and bosses, and the younger generation is, I know, Grant, I'm not pointing at you. It's slowly, should we say, aging out. I mean, there's just an acceptance from the younger generation that we always have connections to the internet. We're always online. Things are available wherever I am in the world, and the cloud helps to do that. And at the same time, if you're not going into the cloud, you need to make sure your on-premises information systems are equally available, just like the cloud. So that's where I spend so much of my day discussing, all in a circle, basically. No, the cloud is evil. No, it's not. Actually, it's quite cool. But don't go everywhere into the cloud, because you've got to choose the right tool for the right job. It's a very roundabout way of answering your question, but hopefully I covered some information.
No. That all makes sense. Bob, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. What we typically see is it's when people want to get their data closer to their users. So, for example, I worked on an application where our user base was located in our company, but then we also provided the same exact services to another company located in the eastern part of the United States. It made more sense for the external company for the data to be over there for their data, and then for our data to be self-hosted, because we want to reduce the latency. We want to provide a world-class experience for something like that. In terms of all cloud or all on-premise, so at Octopus, we're actually all cloud, and the primary reason is because we didn't want to make the initial purchase of all that necessary infrastructure. Like, we didn't have any of that initial infrastructure in place. It didn't make a lot of sense from a cost point of view to spend a ton of money as a startup. And we're like, okay, let's go into the cloud and let's just host everything in the cloud from the get-go. And we started like that, and it kind of stayed that way. But for existing corporations that have a lot of infrastructure already in place, it makes a lot of sense to try to reuse that as much as possible up until the point where it's no longer useful. I mean, you're not going to be running a 15-year-old server and hopefully get the same performance as you would in the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, I worked for a .com back in '98 when you guys were in high school.
Pretty close.
But, and we made the same choices, right? It was like, do we buy hardware? Well, no, it's an investment that we don't have. So, I mean, we didn't have a cloud available at the time, but even then you could dodge those kinds of purchases. So yeah, it's not a shock that that's how things run. Well, okay, so let me ask this. When a company decides to go, right, either whole or in part, and again, like you guys said, they're probably mostly going to be in part, do they go to more than one cloud provider? Bob, you want to start?
Yeah, I don't really see a lot of customers going to more than one cloud provider at any given time, mostly because trying to find an expert in Azure and GCP, or trying to build up that knowledge base for Azure and AWS, that's a big ask. If you can find someone who's certified in both, you found yourself a unicorn, so to speak. And then also, you kind of have to then go against the lowest common denominator. So you're using much more of the infrastructure features, where it's just typically you're running everything on VMs, as opposed to leveraging the platform features, where like Azure SQL or anything like that.
Yep, completely agree. There are quite a few companies at the very beginning of a discussion around let's go to the cloud will explore this fantastic idea of, well, let's spread everything across all of the major players. Let's go for Azure, AWS, and GCP, just to make sure that we can deal with the outage of one of these cloud providers. Very quickly, as Bob has said, they'll realize, wait a minute, then that means we need, let's, for example, say SQL Server knowledge. That's fine. That's infrastructure as a service, though. And as soon as these platform plays come into view, you don't want to have full-blown VMs running in the cloud. You want to use these platform services. And that's where it immediately falls down. Equally, come on, seriously, none of those three big named cloud providers are going to go dead completely. This is where it starts to get interesting, talking to companies about a move to the cloud. Even a hybrid sort of stretched scenario is quite often they will say, well, how can we take what we have and just lift and shift and just have it all run in the cloud, or half in the cloud, half on-prem, not realizing that the ability of the cloud is actually, or rather the advantage of the cloud is not to do a one-to-one move. It's rather to take what you currently have, smash it to pieces, and rebuild it using these cool Lego blocks that you've got in the cloud provider. Because nobody can do, well, Nobody can really do Azure SQL DB on premises. Potentially you could try, but you don't want to do that. What's the point? These providers do it for you. The same with all of this hyperscaling and automatic scaling and so on. That's what these things are for.
Well, it's funny working for a vendor. We support AWS more and more. By the way, there's a bunch of new stuff coming out. And we support Azure. Of course, we support Azure. And we're supporting Google. I have to learn them all a little bit. Let me just tell you, they're different. So, I can see why you wouldn't want to necessarily do that. That would be hard to really put your entire infrastructure onto, 2 or 3 clouds. All right. So if you're in a hybrid environment, what are some unique challenges? I mean, like granted, if you're all on the cloud, there are some unique challenges. If you're all on premises, there's some unique challenges. But if you're in a mix, what's unique about the mix there?
For me, it was kind of answering the question that always comes back is, what's your source of truth for the data? I mean, and what kind of data are you replicating or pushing up to the cloud? And is it a copy of your data? If that's the case, then again, who is the source of truth? Is it just the full-on data set? And then you have to worry about latency, because if you're just hosting everything up in the cloud, but you're still connecting your applications that are self-hosted up there, are you worried about latency at all? Or is that a concern? Is your application built for something like that? Those are some of the things that I've kind of seen in the past when we did that. And then also having kind of a weird sort of, what I call it, this like sort of testing environment, production environment that doesn't make a lot of sense, where I've seen some companies where like their hybrid cloud model is, well, their test environments are all self-hosted and everything's local. And then their production environment, that's what's up in the cloud. And you're not really testing apples to apples at that point. And you push something up to the cloud and go, man, performance really stinks. And you're like, well, you kind of brought it on yourself because you didn't test it how it's going to run. So those are some of the kind of more interesting things I've seen with the hybrid cloud model.
Yeah,
wild.
Completely agree. You get into some really interesting discussions where previously, if everything was on-prem, then you've pretty much guaranteed you've got at least 100 megabit local network connections, or gigabit, or 10 gig even. And very quickly in the cloud or in a hybrid environment, you don't, right? And yes, these latencies and bandwidth limitations become extremely apparent when all of a sudden your application is actually loading tens or hundreds of megabytes of data for a page refresh in an application. Or even worse, you're hosting the click once deployment package of your executable in the cloud, and you've got to download it over some terrible dial-up connection or even a DSL connection, run into this thing, especially, the wonderful example of Germany and its infrastructure. We still don't have complete broadband rollout in the country. And I'm sure it's the same in America, because it's just a huge place, right? And there's areas where they just don't have fast internet. In a previous job, I was the DBA, and we had data centers spread across the world, and there was connections to Australia with a 512 kilobit connection. So it was very easy, or at least for me, it's quite easy to at least understand the limitations that will happen between running things between different data centers or regions in Azure, connecting to your local office in, I don't know, Jonesville in the middle of nowhere, right? It's just the way these things are, but many companies just don't realize that until it's too late.
You also have to worry about VPN connections as well. Sorry, I was just thinking a lot of companies, they'll set up VPN connections between their on-premise data center as well as their the cloud provider as well, and that even slows it down even more. I worked at a company where we switched cloud providers just because we could find a data center closer to our home office, and we could upload faster because it had to do less hops to get onto the internet backbone before. And then it's like, oh my gosh, this is almost I think it was a 5 times improvement in speed in terms of just exact same setup. It was crazy.
Wow, that is nuts. Well, okay. Well, that leads me to another question then. Where, in what situation would you tell people, look, don't do a hybrid? Like you shouldn't be doing this. What could lead to that decision?
I think particularly new young companies who have got no current IT infrastructure, there would be a question of whether you even need to bother or not. We've got a huge advantage right now with the whole COVID pandemic situation where effectively a brand new company starting today would not really go out and hire a huge office somewhere and have everybody in one location. So everybody gets a laptop, everybody has an internet connection, using some cloud services for office or general back office connections, and away you go. We're actually helping a lot of companies move away from on-prem exactly to the cloud for these reasons. Their data centers are old and need replacing, and they're looking at a capital expenditure in the millions to replace hardware. And they're saying, well, actually, if we calculate it through, we can just stretch that same investment over 5 years of cloud usage, and we're completely flexible. We don't have to worry about this anymore. And that's where I would certainly see a hybrid use scenario is not really needed.
I like the point that you made earlier about basically you smash your application and then you build it on additional Lego box. If you haven't done that due diligence and you haven't done the research appropriate for that, and you're just saying, what we need to do is we just need to move to the cloud. That's going to solve all our problems. And when someone has that mindset, you're like, are you 100% sure you know what you're going to do? And like, no, we'll just figure it out as we go. It's like, you need to have, if they haven't come up with a plan or they haven't done that due diligence or the research or the POCs or anything like that, I'm really hesitant to start recommending that. Or if they have this massive monolithic application that would take decades to rewrite, then the cost isn't worth it at that point. The effort isn't worth it almost.
We run into that exact scenario where companies are just like, okay, right, we now believe the cloud is safe. We're going to go cloud. We're all in on cloud and cloud and cloud. We're going to throw away everything and we're going to move to the cloud. Okay, fine. Do you know what that even entails? So first you start the investigations and then realize that they've got 10,000 servers spread around and another 5,000 servers which are in the dark IT, the shadow IT that's been built by people who said our IT team isn't quick enough, so we'll just do it ourselves with Excel and Access and all these terrible solutions which basically come out of the woodwork, and then they realize, oh wait, actually, we can't really do this. Or they say, no, don't care, we're going to do it anyway, and then start screaming blue murder about how the cloud is so crazy expensive because now they're burning every CPU second is costing them money, where a previous on-premises installation, they already paid for the hardware and they're already paying for the servers to run, so they don't care. It gets really, really interesting to see those either, shall we say, first 3 months of a failed implementation or migration, or or the very beginnings of the discussion, and people just not realizing or understanding what belongs to a migration or a stretch into the cloud.
Well, I mean, to a degree, are you guys, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so don't throw rocks. You're talking about technical debt and either creating it or not paying it off. Am I wrong?
Yeah,
I'm wrong.
As I said, part of it is not paying it off, but also being very cognizant of the debt you're about to create yourself and understanding, yes, this is going to be a pretty big jump to go into this hybrid model. It's not going to be just a straight up lift and shift like everyone hopes it's going to be. You're going to realize that in order to provision, you're so used to going back and saying, hey, all I need is just an 8-core, 64 gigabyte server to host my database, and you're just so used to doing that, and to say, all right, and then your infrastructure team go, great, here you go. But then you realize you go to the cloud, that's a very expensive machine to run 24/7, and you're like, have you done that, and have you done the due diligence on that? And yeah, you haven't done all the performance tuning and everything like that within that database to get to that point. So there's that initial tech debt that you have to kind of go through, but then there's that kind of hidden tech debt that you're not really thinking about until you run into it face first.
Yeah, and you make a really good point there. The whole part of that scenario you described was basically the current IT team not understanding that the future options that are delivered through the cloud are completely different. They're still thinking in the old, a server in a data center doing its job for me. It's been slowly dissolved, or maybe it's just more of a fuzzy concept now that we've got VMs. But even talking about VMs and what that all means is still a complete quantum leap further forward into understanding the different parts of a platform as a service. That, okay, we're not going to run these things the same way anymore. Stop thinking in the old building blocks. You got to analyze everything completely.
Well, cool. That leads me to my next question, because I have long been an advocate for the platform as a service offerings. I was excited about Azure SQL Database when it had a 1 gig limit in size, which everyone's like, why would I do this? So platform as a service offerings, do they hurt? Do they help? Or are they sort of neutral? What's the deal with platform as a service?
I personally think that they can be very beneficial. But again, it goes back to the old answer of it depends on the type of application and the type of performance that you're expecting. A good DBA, they can performance tune a database running on a VM or a SQL server running on a cluster to within an inch of its life to solve very specific use cases. So if you're trying to load massive quantities of data and you need to have this high throughput, and you can worry about all this low-level type stuff, might not be the great solution for platform as a service as you'd expect. But it's also very beneficial because you can spin up new databases and you can get going and you can take advantage of the ability to scale out and scale down much quicker than running everything on a VM and trying to configure a VM correctly and then having to worry about, oh my gosh, we're seeing this big jump in traffic and we need to handle all this additional data and all this additional traffic, and we need to scale up our infrastructure. And when you're running on a VM, you might have to take a restart on your server to add more CPU, as opposed to like within platforms as a service, it's almost a little slider that you change, and it's not as intrusive on something like that. And so you don't have to plan as much. So I do think it helps out, but I think it also depends very specifically on your use cases and making sure you're aware of what you're getting yourself into.
Definitely. You made a really good point there about the scalability. When was this? About 9 months ago, maybe a year ago. I was contacted by a company and they needed some performance tuning exactly on a SQL Server problem. And they were already running their SQL servers as full VMs in the cloud. So still burning a lot of money for something that maybe wasn't required that way, but they were in the process of becoming a hybrid or cloud-based company. And they had a huge performance problem and couldn't fix it. And quickly on the phone, I was looking at the issue and trying to help them and said, right, well, we're going to have to do some specific performance tuning of code. And I can come to see you guys in 3 days' time. And they said, well, yeah, 3 days' time is cool, but we need to fix the problem like now because we can't take orders on our website. So it's like, fine, okay. So all they did was basically quadrupled the size of their VM for 3 days, paid the absolutely eye-watering bill for those 3-4 days, but they could take orders. It was fine until we got to the problem and fixed the problem. And that ability is something that even if you don't go complete platform as a service, if you just move into a more, through a cloud provider, you have the ability to react to things like this so much better than you would do if it was on premises. Because on premises, you buy your 8-core machine and your 64 gigs of RAM, and then that's the end, right? Whereas you go to Microsoft and say, I need a VM, and all of a sudden I need 96 cores. They're like, yep, sure, put your credit card number here and we'll go. And it works.
Right, exactly. We have a question came in. I'll get to it in 1 second. I just want to talk about the platform as a service some more. Now, I talk to a lot of people, like, and I mean, and you guys brought it up already, but lift and shift seems to be what every company wants to do. And let's face it, platform as a service, and I'm not picking on any of the services when I say this, they're not good at lift and shift. I mean, just because it's inherently different. How do you tackle that lift and shift mentality within an organization? How do you, it's practically, how do you sell DevOps to an organization? How do you get people away from the idea of lift and shift?
Well, at least in the discussions that I am involved in, just looking at the calculation of exactly what it means scares off 95% of the companies immediately when they realize that, okay, this server that I bought for, let's just have to have a number, $10,000, and it's installed in my data center, and it costs us $2,000 a year to run. That's $12,000 a year, or $12,000 for the first year, and then $2,000 every year after. All of a sudden costs maybe $6,000 a month to run if they've just done a copy paste of the machine into to the cloud. Very quickly realize that, wait a minute, that doesn't work out right. That's not cheaper. So one of the first discussions that we start is the cloud does not equal cheap. The cloud equals a completely new universe with completely new tools that you can use. And it's more a case of education around what tools are there. I used to have Duplos, and now I have Lego Technic, right? It's a huge leap. It's not even just like a slight step forward. It's all these completely new things that you can put together. And making it clear that lift and shift, you can do it if you want to do, but you are going to be burning money. If you're happy to burn money, rock on. That every single cloud provider will happily take your money. If you want to run full fat VMs on their systems, it's fine. But you're not going to actually win anything by doing that.
I think the analogy that I love is there's a picture of an iceberg, and with a traditional IT self-hosted, the iceberg is teeny tiny, but underneath the water is this massive block of ice. But with the cloud, it's almost inversed, where it's this massive block of ice that you see. So you see all of these you see all these extra costs that you don't normally see within that self-hosted or the on-premise model. But that was always there. You just never saw it. It was hidden in salary. It was hidden in hours and everything like that. Whereas now with that, and being very upfront and saying, okay, if we want to do this, this is going to be the X amount of dollars that you expect to spend if you want to go this way. Now, if you want to go with the platform as a service model, that's fantastic. But are you also prepared for this? You're going to have to kind of handle and kind of figure out what the heck is like a DTU with Azure SQL, and how many DTUs do I actually need? And you have to spend the time and the effort for something like that. And
right,
I think that hopefully that once I guess money talks, and I think that's just kind of the point we're getting to. Is like it's a great way to it's a very, very concrete way of showing someone, yep, this is going to be what it costs. And it's going to help someone break their mind shift of just, I'm going to go ahead and just push everything right up to the cloud and we're all done.
Right. All right. So we've got the question is they're part of a larger production company. And do you see any future where a cloud strategy would make practical sense? Now, I'm not entirely sure what they mean by production company, but I assume manufacturer.
That's what I would understand it as too. Yeah, that's an argument I hear a lot as well. We're a factory; we make things. We need fast response times, and we can't afford to have fat internet connections at all of our different locations. Or it's maybe impossible. We run oil rigs, so how can we have the internet at an oil rig, right? This is the whole point, right? There is no 100% correct answer for every company on the planet. You need to look at each of the different restrictions you have and requirements you have and find out which is the best thing to use. Now, there are solutions from different suppliers that help make this easier. Things I'm thinking of are like these edge solutions from Microsoft to basically have the cloud at your site, wherever that may be. And it's an architectural design challenge. There is no correct solution for every company on the planet. And there is certainly a future where a cloud strategy can work for a production company. But I would be quite confident saying it will not be 100% a cloud strategy. It would be a hybrid solution of some sort.
We typically will help a lot of retail companies. And so they have a lot of, say, retail stores, or it's a fast food chain, and they have a lot of fast food stores. And they need to have access to their data very, very quickly. And so typically what we see is inside the actual stores, they might be running a server or servers. A couple of the fast food companies, I won't name names, they actually run Kubernetes clusters in their retail stores or at their fast food chains. You're like, oh, well, that's pretty cool. But that's kind of that'd be more of the self-hosted model, but you could have your data sitting up in the cloud for like a syncing type of thing. So when the server can connect and it has the appropriate, it has that time, it can start syncing down the data and syncing down all that different information. And so back to the whole question, back to the whole answer of it depends. It obviously depends on the type of thing that you hope to do, and also the infrastructure you have in place at the various like factories or retail stores or anything like that.
Yeah, the way I would see it as well is if you have a current production facility or facilities, then you have a current architecture and an idea of how that should run. That's not set in stone. So all you would do is take options from a cloud supplier and assess, is there anything we could take that we currently have that maybe isn't as good as it could be? And how could a cloud strategy help and solve that? Mm-hmm. So in the case of a retailer, maybe their point of sale system collects all of the sales for the day and needs to upload it to a centralized location. Well, how's about it loads it to a data lake in Azure, so that then a data lake is something that never existed before. It wasn't even a tool you could use. And all of a sudden, it's an option. Maybe this allows you to do better or easier or faster data analytics for your sales systems. And this is the whole point where it's the job that never sleeps in terms of learning is IT. You always hear that doctors and so on need to do this. And in IT, it's the same. If you sleep for a year or two, catching up is going to be nearly impossible. But keeping on top of these things to understand at least generally what's happening allows you to keep an eye out and say, oh, wait a minute, I could use that maybe in 6 months' time when we got a bit more time on our hands to take a look at that. Maybe that's something we could use. Whereas previously just an on-prem solution, you would never be able to touch it.
Right. Well, I mean, my son works for manufacturing. He works in, he builds valves, including for SpaceX, which is really cool. But he's working in a hybrid environment. They have a lot of local stuff because, the CNC machines, you don't want to wait for it to go up to the internet and come back down while it's deciding where to make this massive cut in a giant piece of metal that you're standing in front of that's spinning at 50 million miles an hour, however fast they're going. So yeah, that's bad choice. You've got the computer local, but they've got a lot of stuff mixed up into the cloud too. So I mean, they're already a hybrid environment. So yeah, so I would say the answer to the question would be, yeah, places are going to be hybrid. I mean, it's just that, but there's stuff that's going to be local. I mean, like running the CNC machine.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, so we've got 5-10 minutes left. What is one piece of advice that you'd offer someone who's either moving or thinking about moving to the hybrid cloud? What's the one thing that the takeaway they need today?
From my side, it would be, do not approach the cloud trying to just replicate what you've done before. approach it and see what is on offer in terms of the tools. I think we've hit this drum quite often enough in the last 40 minutes, but it's basically there is not forget everything you've done before, but be open to any of the new options that are available to you. There are solutions that you just never would have imagined, and abilities to glue those together as well in ways that you would not have imagined. Someone I was talking to recently had their CRM system and their marketing system and something else. I can't remember what. And they glued those together using the Office automation backend. I forget what it's called. Flow, is it, I think? Or Office Automate or something. And that was something that they would previously have had to hire a developer who knew those 3 different systems well enough to be able to glue them together. They spent a few weeks, admittedly, in evenings, weekends, working it out, but they could glue things together. It was just previously not possible. And that's all through using the cloud, right? So I would say go for exactly that. What are the new toys that I can play with, and how could they be useful to me?
I actually had 2 pieces of advice, but I'll focus on the first one. It's back to the other point, which is research, but also look at the security platform and your security footprint as well. So, for example, AWS RES instances, you can back up to S3, which I think is just an awesome feature. I think that's really cool. And you can restore from S3. But you could also back up to an insecure S3 bucket and not realize it. And if you haven't done some sort of security audit, then that could be something that you could run into a lot of hot water with doing something like that. And so that's just an example. Also, going through and what kind of users are going to have access to this data, and how are we going to even expose this? Is it just going to be within, say, an Azure resource group, and you can only have VNets that have access to it, or is this going to be something that's publicly available because we can't set up a point-to-point VPN connection, and maybe we have to restrict it by IP address? Be very, very, very cognizant of what you want to set up, and every step of the way, constantly be asking yourself, is this going to expose data that it shouldn't, or are we good with doing something like this? And and also never be afraid to ask for help and have someone who has experience look over your cloud footprint, and making sure that, yes, we have everything and we feel very confident about what we have.
Yeah, well, I mean, no one's ever going to put a backup onto an unsecured drive on the internet. That doesn't happen.
Never, ever.
Good Lord. Oh, the number of times it happens so frequently. It's just kind of like, what are you people thinking? Anyway, cool. Is there any questions I didn't ask that you guys expected? Is there any other piece of information that we need to share? Let me just make sure we don't have any other questions come in. No, okay. Is there any other bit of information we need to share? Because we've got about 5 minutes to cover, although our next speaker will be coming in shortly, I hope. That's going to be Scott Sauber, talking about SQL Server DevOps and how to get started. Getting started so easy. You don't need a class on this. Yeah, and the man who makes DevOps tools and the man who's implemented them are both laughing at me.
I think, though, to answer your question, I think we've covered pretty much everything I was expecting to cover, at least. But definitely, I agree with Bob's point on security. That's an interesting discussion to begin with companies in general. Is, okay, so guys, you want to move into the cloud? What is your current data protection strategy? Do you have data classification at all? And usually it's a response of, oh, yeah, that's been on our roadmap for the last 5 years, and nobody's had time to be able to do that. And that immediately is an issue to discuss, to plan how or what data is even required to be secured in what level as well.
Right. That makes sense to me, because it's I mean, of all the things in the cloud, it seems like security is the one it's hard to mess it up because they're all secure by default, right? I mean, every one of them locks you down. But with a little bit of effort, you can screw it up big time.
It's the old question of security versus usability, and what level of risk is acceptable to you and to your organization, and who should have access to this data. That's something that just seems to always be a constant struggle. It's almost a constant fight. It's like developers, because I came from a development background, I wanted to have production-like data or something very similar. And a lot of times for companies that are just doing everything on-premise, like, hey, production-like data, why don't we just create a backup of production, run a couple scripts, and here you go. And not really thinking about all the data that's in that database, and it's like, oh, okay, great. But if you move into more of a hybrid approach or into a cloud approach, that's probably not going to be as acceptable.
Yeah, no kidding. God, man, the stories, it's just horrifying. William, anything else you want to add?
No, I just noticed there's a question come in saying, what do you think are the major risks of an enterprise staying on premises? Fantastic. For me, at least, if I was looking for a new job and found that a company was remaining on premises for the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever, has no strategy to move into the cloud in any way, shape, or form, that would mean I would not want to work there. I would avoid working in a place which is closed out to anything new. So it's a major risk in terms of how are you going to find good people when the good IT stuff, the interesting, exciting things are at least hybrid, if not fully cloud. So that would at least be a major risk, in my opinion, is you're going to lose out on the best people because they're only going to be interested in doing the more interesting, more innovative, newer stuff.
Right.
Software, I've never been in a company where we've been able to reduce our software footprint. It's always increasing. You're always developing more and more applications. And every time you develop a new application, every time you add another database, that's an additional thing you have to worry about upgrading and maintaining. And staying on-premise, you are increasing the amount of time it takes to, hey, I want to upgrade to SQL Server 2023, whenever that comes, if that comes out, if that's a year. Mm-hmm. And you have to spend all that extra time and effort, and that cost keeps growing and growing and growing. And we've talked to a lot of customers who are still, say, on SQL 2008 or SQL 2012, and through no fault of their own, it's just the level of effort to upgrade and maintain and make sure you apply all these patches correctly. It just gets harder and harder because everything keeps growing. It's an all-consuming thing. It just never decreases. It will always increase. It feels like.
That's great.
And just to grab onto that, just before I guess we're going to run out of time, but in that exact point, there's lots and lots of products that are just going to have an end of life on premises. They just won't be done anymore. Like, not everybody's a fan of it, but as I understand it, Exchange Server from Microsoft is now basically a dead thing, and there's only going to be an online version of it. These things are just going to die out, right? The sure. Fully on-premises, not cloud at all things. You're going to hit an end point of support, and those products will not get continued. And fine, if you're okay staying on that old version, okay. But the risk in terms of security patching and so on will also disappear.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy. Well, guys, thanks so much for all you talked about today. It was good stuff. Really appreciate it. I'm sure everyone here got some good information out of it. We're coming up with our next presenter now. William, Bob, thank you guys.